Be careful, that was a load bearing fragments of silicon.
All right, welcome to another installment of the Fragments Silicon Daylight Interviews. Joining us this week is Jonathan Concepcion of Galactic Slice.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you guys for having me on this show.
No problem, no problem. We are glad that you are here. Anyway, so how we like to get started is we like to get to know the people behind the games, the studio, and all of that business. And we usually begin by asking this particular question: what got you interested in video games, both on a personal and a professional level?
Well, I think I speak for most gamers when you say like, oh, grew up playing video games back in the NES days and then PlayStation 2. So I was actually born in 91. So a lot of my childhood revolved around video games. And I thought, well, what if I grow up and make video games because I love it so much? So I went to college, didn't pursue video games outside of my own state because I was afraid to leave family, and basically lived a full-time job. And for the most part, I wasn't thinking, I was just playing, making little games, but nothing too crazy. And then eventually, when I ended up straining my back from lifting too much heavy stuff, I knew I had to do something with my degree in terms of how to go about life, because it was either strain my back more, even though I was like in my mid 20s, or I would just try to make video games. And so Galactic Slice was born. So in terms of as a company, it's still a solo developed company. I'm the main guy that does a lot of pretty much all the coding, programming, sound effects. The only thing I do is I hire commission for artwork and music, because those are the only twos I'm a little bit afraid to mess with. And One Bit Adventure was just my mindset of, well, let me start off with something simple, because every time I try to make a open world RPG game, it ends up in utter failure, and I just ended up scrapping it. So, One Bit Adventure, there was.
I mean, there's
Honestly,
actually
I
a
feel like
fairly
this is kind of the golden age for
there's
people
a
from
fair
our.
amount to unpack here.
Yes.
Damn it.
I suppose I should first ask, what was your background in college actually for?
So it was actually, and I always feel afraid to say it because it was ITT Tech. If you are, yes, so it seems like someone's familiar. If you are aware, ITT Tech got shut down. A lot of their programs were falsified, as in they would say. So for my profession, it was actually a mix of visual communications, and I don't want to say it's game design per se. I think it was called digital entertainment and game design. So it was a very broad degree. But in terms of actually what I did in the college, we were messing with ActionScript with Adobe Flash. We were making Flash games. And then we messed with Unreal Engine 1. Like, mind you, there was already Unreal Engine 3 out, but we were still using part 1. So it was very behind in terms of technology. It was also behind in terms of what they were teaching in terms of coding language. I actually never got to learn C sharp. I actually had to learn that myself after college. And so, yeah, it was a mixed bag of, well, I'm gonna push through 4 years. Maybe it was just the beginning hiccup. And it turns out it was basically I was able to get into an internship in a local game company. However, that game company was, you should say 50-50, not like the best company. They were trying to make games, but they were not releasing games. So they're in a loop of, let's make this game, and then they move on to another. Let's make this game. But the main guy running the show, he's a really, really nice guy. He actually worked with making Dead Space. So he does have a track record. He does 3D modeling and animation and rigging. So I was trusting that company, but the company itself helped me learn Unity, and for the most part, that's what I leaned heavy on. Was, well, let me watch YouTube tutorials, let me learn more about C# in Unity, and yeah, goes to show like
It's kind
I
of
succeed-
hilarious how good like on the job type training, especially for like coding, can be compared to going to a quote unquote formal school.
Yes. And I think when you see like actual people doing the job, it's much more valuable than sitting back on a textbook and then following step by step with a teacher. It's really not giving you the experience that you need that is more like,
especially when it comes to coding, because there are so many different variables. It's not like a math problem as much. There are ways you can figure out how to go about it differently and more efficiently. Where with at least with general math, I can do it differently, but efficiency doesn't really matter as much as just getting the right answer.
Yeah. And that's true, because when you run into the situations in terms of what causes bugs, what makes things break.
Oh God, yes.
It's never a 1 + 1 = 3. Oh, let me just change that to a 2. It's never like that. There's a chain reaction, but also just trying to figure out different tactics to make it more optimized is going to be better in the long run. And optimization isn't really taught well in school. So yeah, there's the plus and minus, but definitely the minus being that I went to ITT Tech. I thankfully did get a refund off their lawsuit, and
yeah, I was about to say I hope you were involved in that, because especially for like the digital entertainment stuff, it was bad.
Yeah, it was terrible. Oh man, but yeah, it was one of those things where I was like hoping for the lawsuit to go through, because like this was still at the time I was making 1-bit adventure, and I was like, dude,
I could use that money to start my company.
Yeah,
especially because they weren't cheap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, so I think you mentioned in passing that you've been trying to do an open world RPG thing for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
so yeah, along that lines, these were one of those failed prototypes that I would put into my head and be like, all right, I'm gonna do it. So one of the things, well, previously it was gonna be, well, I'm gonna make a League of Legends sort of style.
Oh,
and,
my brother, you know.
Yeah, so it was basically that. I was like, let me just make these capsules. Oh, it's easy to do pathfinding, if League can do it, I can do it. And so when I went ahead and did it, I was like, well, yeah, it's a lot harder than I thought. And then I just scrapped that project. There was other projects. I tried to make Kingdom Hearts, but that failed pretty quickly. I didn't even get to the modeling process because I'm not a 3D modeler. I love coding and making things work and getting systems to be like automated in a way. But when it comes to actually like making the artwork, it's my downfall, and I do have to rely a lot on other people to help me with that sort of effect. So, but yeah, actually, I should mention there were other successful mini games per se. One of the main mini games that kind of like launched me forward in terms of what my idea would be was a game, and I remember. It was called Robocraft YouTubers in Space. Now, this was a space shooter, and based off the game Robocraft, and if you don't know what Robocraft is, it's a free-to-play Steam game. They were popular back in, I want to say 2019, but maybe even before that. It was about building. It was like Minecraft, but then there was battle bots, and so you had a mix of different things. Well, I was very intertwined with that community and made Robecraft YouTube videos that I said, well, I have a knowledge of making games. Why don't I take that game and make it into a space shooter where it's different YouTube avatar faces shooting at what would be Robocraft bots? And that was a tremendous success. It was 2D. It was like one of those. It was like Galaga, but flipped to the side, and it was endless scroller. So, a bunch of enemies come until the final boss, and there was lasers everywhere. Now, the bonus to that was the actual developers of Robocraft played my game, and at that point, I knew there was like a strong interest in how I made a Unity game, and it was a foundation to say that I was comfortable with making a game that was fun. And mind you, this was like a little mini project way before One Bit Adventure, but it was still in the mindset of trying to figure out what I want to do in life, but also I want to be successful in what I made in terms of getting a degree. 'Cause I didn't want to make it look like I got a degree and then I just threw it in the trash. Well, I had some knowledge that I did get, just not the best of it, but yeah. That's how that turned out.
I mean, I suppose it worked out in the end.
Yes, and I think in the end it did work out. The game itself was praised in the community. It didn't end up going into a fully developed game. It was more of a 3 levels. There was hundreds of different avatars that you could play as and unlock, and it was like a level 1 to 100 thing. So there was some grind to it. And in terms of learning different elements of how to manage level up system, that's what I ended up using in One Bit Adventure. There was just a lot that I ended up I would say there's different pieces of foundations that came along the way in previous mini games such as that. There's even like a Pokemon game I made that was essentially taking Robocraft and turning it into Pokemon. And it was a mix of different things, but it never fully finished. And sorry about my dog, Yoshi. He often only barks when someone decides to like drive by or honk their horn, and he just goes off a little. So I do apologize if you do hear him.
It's fine. I don't recall hearing anything.
Awesome, good.
I could kind of hear him faintly, but it's fine. We've had worse.
Yeah, I've had this surprisingly the Blue Yeti is what I have, and I have the game all the way down, so it's getting rid of a lot of noise, which is good. So
anyway, so finally we come properly to One Bit Adventure. I suppose before we get into it properly, for the uninitiated, what is One Bit Adventure?
Yes, so One Bit Adventure is a free-to-play turn-based roguelike adventure game where you choose a character class and you go on an adventure. And throughout your adventure, there's these rogue enemies, or I should say monsters, in the world, and your goal is to ascend upward as far as possible. There are different bosses that you may come into contact. There's also different loot that will help you progress even further. But the main goal of the game is to try to reach max level and see how far you can go. The idea was very reminiscent of different scroller types games. Jetpack Joyride was one inspiration. I believe there is Pixel Dungeon, that was another, and Crypto the Necro Dancer, which essentially it is Crypto the Necro Dancer, but without the beats. Anytime you move, the enemies move. So if you don't do anything, you can take your time. That's pretty much One Bit Adventure.
So it's in the style of Rogue more so than other roguelikes, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, that's one of the things about the original Rogue, when you moved everything else.
Yeah, and that was the one thing. Yeah, Rogue, and I can't believe I forgot that. It was essentially, I wanted to go back into the main Rogue element. And I know a lot of times when you say roguelikes nowadays, it feels like it's a deck builder. You know, there's always different choices, and we've leaned away from saying procedural dungeons and stuff like that. One Bit Adventure is actually randomly generated dungeons. all the level chunks are made hand piece by piece. That way I can have more creative control over how the map lays out more. But yeah.
Good to know. And so, what was the breakthrough here? Like, was
Yeah,
there a particular thing that made this come together where your previous ones fell apart?
yeah, I think the element of keeping it simple. Um, I mentioned my back straining, and it was kind of like, well, this is my only one shot. Like I better make something that would be very great, but also not too complicated where I stop making the project. So it turned out like when I went ahead and created just a simple map, I wanted to limit my space, but also limit the colors, just basically limit everything. And 2D was definitely the easiest route to go. Um, in terms of sprites, I always think of like 16 by 16 being like a good size sprite that isn't too huge to make, but also easier to find. And one of the things that I used was Kenny's art pack. So if you don't know Kenny, Kenny basically makes a lot of paid assets and free assets, and one of them was 1-bit, and it was basically different sprites that encompass 16 by 16. So after getting a free asset, I was like, well, let me try to make something that I can control, but also it feels relaxing and fun. So in terms of like why I didn't go real time, I myself, okay, it's weird. It's weird because I used to play Call of Duty a lot, right? I love like the action, the thrill, going fast. But then as I got older, my reflex started going down and I didn't play as much. So in terms of switching the idea, I was like, why not just make a turn based? And I don't feel the hassle to go as fast and it's more controlled. So if I move, they move. So that was my whole reasoning of how I try to simplify things to a point where I can actually finish a project. And I would say One Bit Adventure is not a finished product. It's still a lot, but I was able to get the groundworks to the pieces together to actually make it fun and enjoyable. With most games that have RPG elements, you have the level up system, HP, certain character classes as mana, and then you have the idea of attacking. So everything was simple. So that I guess that's where I felt like it had a better chance of succeeding after I started having the enemies in and being able to attack. So.
Hmm. And how long ago did you first start up One Bit Adventure development?
Yeah, so it actually released on mobile platform 4.5 years ago, but it's actually closer to 5 years of development. So yeah, it's been a long time, just working on what seems to be a simple project. Um, and I wouldn't say I used 100% of my time when I was working on a game because I was still part time and I was like, sometimes I'll work 4 hours, sometimes I'll work 1 hour. So my amount of time spent in the beginning phases were very low. But then after release, then I started amping up how much hours I'm going to spend on this feature, that feature. And then eventually, the community was formed on Discord, and I basically got a lot of suggestions, a lot of different ideas, and try to make One Bit Adventure as big as possible. So.
Hmm. And to that end, what has the community suggested?
So this is a long list of things, but for the
boy.
most part, so like there's I should say let me start off from the beginning because I think if I just throw it at you, it's like it'll be a little too much of stuff that's not known. So from the beginning of the game, it was based off choosing a character And on the left side of the screen, you'll see health, base attack, critical chance, and coin boost. That was it for the beginning of the game when it released. Over time, the community suggested like different active skills, passive skills, which I was all for. And then about, I want to say a year or two, it could have been a year after it released, worked on professions. And that was completely based off community to try to get more dynamic builds into the character. Eventually, it got into making more dungeons and different types of dungeons. We even made a community-based dungeon where Depths of the Sea is essentially made by the community. Like, all the sprites were basically them pitching their ideas. Jube is a guy that made a lot of sprites, and he's been part of the art team. But when it comes to what the community wants in the game, it really boils down to character class and more active skills, passive skill, different things for the characters to do. Because once you hit the max level, you got your character maxed out, you got the best build. It's like the end goal kind of thing. So more character classes, more professions. There's a lot of quality of life features, and it's more or less to make things a lot easier. And you are currently playing the beta version, which has a number of things that they're looking forward to. One of them is the adjustment to XP scaling. The XP scaling is pretty low. So I decided to increase it a little more, only because it's gotten to the point where I felt like when I had only 5 character classes, it felt like I needed to like let the grind be a grind and let that enjoyment be when you level up, when you prestige. Now that there's like I believe 2 more or 8 character classes. There's a secret class. So there's 8 character classes in total. So it's like it's gotten to the point where I can relax the XP. You can try to max out all character classes. And then the new dungeon entrances, which when you come across a dungeon, they're actually now more animated. There's animations for certain dungeons, giving it more life, because most of the game has no animations. They're just squish animations. And the main idea was to not like spend too much time adding an attack animation, adding idle animation.
Right, especially for something like this,
Yes. And as many games, the workload can expand the moment you start adding animations. And
the amount of devs we've had spiral into infinite feature creep on this show could probably buy us a studio.
You're not wrong.
Yeah. So this is the first upcoming dungeon entrance you see, and in the before the beta, it was actually only a 3x3 tile in terms of what looks like a dungeon entrance. Now it's more elegant. There's different pieces that goes along, and it makes it feel like you're entering an actual mine versus just a square piece. So.
Mm-hmm.
The other dungeon entrances are a lot more animated, and it's just trying to give that more atmospheric vibe.
Yeah.
So,
and we do have a question in Twitch chat from user stupidly long Twitch name. Do you ever have plans to balance checks and patches for all the classes?
Yeah, and it's a long list. Like, I've gotten a lot of...
I'm pretty sure this is one of those, if we saw the Google Doc, it'd be like, please, God, help me.
Yeah. And, yeah, and especially because I had added those character classes, now it's like, well, this class does too much damage, this class does not enough. So I do have plans. So what I was going to do for... So Necromancer has the ability... Well... When you get the profession, you have the ability to spawn a zombie. That zombie can actually get stronger the further you are. So if you respawn it gets to be as strong as like the other enemies and even stronger. So one of that is going to be changed with this upcoming update, along with Necromancer's new profession. In terms of other classes, let's not talk about Pyromancer because everyone knows it's the lost child.
There are people in the chat who are talking about Pyro, and I'm like, oh.
Yeah, see, Pyro is one of the classes that, when you get into a project, you get so excited to work on it. And then, so it started off with Warrior, so he was like the best base class. Then Blood Knight, like that was fancy. Then Wizard, and then Necromancer. And then Pyro was like, okay, I'll just I'll add Pyromancer for diversity kind of thing. But it was more or less one of the things where it's like, I have a character class that can shoot fire, but then I didn't have the animations to have it feel better. So I had to use like a effect generator, and some of the moves doesn't look quite as right. But yeah. That's what happened to Pyro. But yes, he is going to get a change once his profession comes, which after Necromancer will come Pyromancer, so we'll touch up that. But in terms of all classes, it's going to take a little more time.
I mean, you are a solo dev.
Yes. So, and I did...
do in the day.
Yeah, and one of the things is like when you... one of the regrets that I've had with the previous years was just I try to work on the second project, which is a sequel to One Bit Adventure. It's called Dungeon of Greed. I try to move on to that, and one of the bad downsides is One Bit Adventure is the main financial thing that's keeping me going. But the moment I try to switch to working on Dungeon of Greed, it just drops. Like you would think like, oh, you get some leeway, you get like 6 months out. No, it drops, and when it drops, it keeps dropping. And so I had to go back to One Bit Adventure. So in terms of trying to get into that, yeah, it's a mixed bag of love. It was more of a love-hate relationship, but I think I'm in that love phase again. And it goes to show, like, being an indie developer and working on a game for longer than a few years, it can get to you, and you get those quick burnouts. So what I ended up doing was I limited my time with One Bit Adventure in terms of coding, and that helped out a lot. So it was, yeah.
Anyway, we got another question from the Twitch channel. User Itari Charger asks when the lore will be added.
Yes. So.
God, that resigned sigh, my guy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's another one if we got money for. Holy shit.
Well, yeah, and in terms of lore, because One Bit Adventure has a few amount of NPCs, but most of them are fillers for the atmosphere. It doesn't pursue a goal or let you know why you're here, what is the Wraith, which is the boss of the world. So I definitely understand that. There is, in my notes, what I want to do, and I did a recent survey with my community, and right now, that is on the list. So it's gonna happen. It's not like before where I said I was gonna add NPCs, and then all of a sudden there was NPCs but no lore. So, and also I want to say journal entries, because journal entries feel like the easy way to like add lore. Like, here you go. But more dynamic situations where if you talk to Shintaro, which is one of the characters, and you use this choice, well, then you just opened up more dialogue that would explain his intentions, his goal, and that's what I want to get into more. Thankfully, the dialogue script was done nicely. Like, I coded it properly, so it's not a mess to mess around with, but it does take time to, like, relearn what I typed out. So, expect it in the future, just not too soon, but it is in my list.
So it was written in Coder.
It's somewhere there. Add lore dash.
It's been added to the list.
Yeah. And that's the one thing. It's like when I tell my people, it's like add it to the notes, and then a couple months later, wait, weren't you supposed to add this? I'll add it to my notes again. I'll put it up to priority. So,
Just don't hit Control F on the notes, please, for the love of God.
yeah, for sure. It's I would say my notes has compiled. I don't even know what year some of my notes are from, so that explains that situation. But thankfully, some of the bugs that ended up getting catched years later is now resolved. So, that's important. So,
That's good.
oh,
Right.
I just saw this. Sorry, one question, Dad. Will pets ever have passive or active skills? So in One Bit Adventure, there are pets, but you don't unlock pets until you reach, I believe, level 50, which is ridiculously long. There is a cat in the game that if you speak to it and says meow, you'll get him as a pet. Now, the one thing is, it was a hard decision to decide what to do with pets because pets were one of the things where I just wanted someone to have a form of progress, and the pets will collect coins and collect items for you. But then came the question of, well, I want my pets to attack because some of them look like a threat. Uh, like some of them look like they could attack, but they're just pets. So in terms of active skills, I don't think pets will have active. I would think more passive skills or benefits to your character would be ideal. You can't have multiple pets, so that's kind of like the downside. So each certain pet will have a certain attribute, but that's for the future for sure.
Add it to the notes.
Yes, add it to the notes. Yeah.
I suppose along those lines, is the cat the only sort of pet you can get currently?
So it's one of those things where it's like you have to like wait until you're level 50 before you. And I think this is a mistake on my part. Is I didn't realize, and I told someone, yeah, it's probably level 30 you get pets. And it's like, no, it's level 50. It's like, oh, okay. So it is a mistake on my part. One thing I am trying to opt for is adding the Pearl Dealer, which is the guy that you have to go to actually get pets, to a different part of the game and having it be more accessible at an early level. So yeah, there's different solutions. I am thinking of those solutions and trying to see if I could get that more clear. Because currently, I think the biggest questions that I get, especially in my like reviews, is where's the pets? Because if you look at your equipment on the left side, you'll see there's a slot for pets, and it's just like, I want a pet. Like, tell me. The game doesn't tell you that, so I need to work on that for sure. So,
I mean, sometimes things like that you can hide until they become available.
Certainly, yeah, and I think that is a good idea. Like to hide it so that the player doesn't know at all, and then once they get a pet, then they can equip it. That is a good idea for sure.
Now, are you able to pet the cat?
After you speak to the cat in the world when you find him, you are able to pet it, and it does a little squish animation on your head where you're like petting it. But yeah, it'll be in your starting camp. It requires like a quick save or an exit to menu before you're able to like pet it.
Good to know. And it's always good when the community is in the chat because we get super specific questions like this. Yeah. Do you ever plan to debuff the pearl sell price? Currently, you can hoard maps, then get a ton of pearls and turn them into a ton of gold, which I think is an oversight considering they're supposed to be used for buying pets.
Yeah, that's definitely a new one that I haven't. That is one I need to add to my notes. Yeah, I haven't messed with the price on pearls because one of the things I thought was like, oh, it's okay to have influx, but it seems like it gets to the point where you either bought all the pets and don't have a use for pearls, you get tons of gold, or you just ignore pets because they don't have any value. So yeah, I think it would be a good consideration to just lower it a bit, but not too much.
Hmm. Right. So we've gotten a pretty good idea of what's on the list. But I suppose a more salient question is, what are you actively working on in terms of game tweaks right at this moment?
Well, the one and number one thing is the overworld chunks. So, um, in in terms of overworld chunks, it basically I want to say 18 tiles high, and essentially making it so that the world feels less repetitive. Now, overworld is the main world where you see the trees and you see the fences. That's the main world, and for the most part, if you don't enter a dungeon, that is the world that you're going to be in for most of the game. Um, and right now, I am at 60 chunks of pieces of maps, just to make the world less repetitive. Previously, uh, there was only 40 chunks. So imagine playing, you're gonna run into the same chunks over and over with that 40 chunks. And it was only like, I guess for years, I've known that it was an issue, when you're handcrafting a world and people are reaching 100,000 steps, it eventually becomes an issue. So in order to have that new player experience be a lot less repetitive, my goal is to hit 100 overworld chunks. And in the current beta, I can't remember exactly. It might have been 40 extra chunks. So right now you are experiencing 80 different chunks, but you do have to reach a certain level before those chunks come out. It's very important that the beginning chunks are easy chunks where like you can have less enemies, you can have more coins, and then the later chunks is more enemies, less coins, but still more loot. So yeah, that's currently what I'm doing now. And then next up will be the Necro Profession. I have all the animations and sprites for it. And then yeah, that'll be a fun one. So in terms of the Necro Profession, it is going to be a puppeteer profession. You'll be able to summon 3 different types of allies. I won't say exactly what they are, how they function, because it's kind of hard to just say it. But let's just say it's going to be a lot of fun of classic Necromancer versus what 1-bits Necromancer is. Yeah, that's the one thing. So like, and just to clarify for you guys, like the current Necromancer is actually more of a druid style necro. So you actually can transcend into what would be the enemies you're attacking. It's only a matter of profession that you can summon a zombie, but it's not your main kit. Your main kit would be to transcend into a boss. That way you can have all the health that a boss has as well as the damage. So
Hmm. And let me see here. Someone's also wondering if you are planning on adding more biomes and diversity between the chunks.
yes, so the one thing I did want to revisit with the overworld chunks was to separate and sort of tag them as, well, these sets of chunks are all trees, let's tag them as trees. These sets of chunks are all fences, let's tag them as that. And kind of like separate the difference between them. Um, but I do want to add sort of like a graveyard segment that only appears at certain levels, and it would be like a mini dungeon in a way because you're entering something that isn't the same as Overworld. So yes, that won't come in this update, unfortunately, because there's a lot of new sprites I want to add to it, so it looks a lot different. But eventually it will come. That's on a top priority right now. So.
Hmm. And what's the timeline looking like on these updates?
Yeah, so the updates have been uh, they have been kind of random recently, only because I was trying. Well, there's there's real life stuff that I'm going through right now. I won't say exactly because that's just that's something everyone has, but my schedule has been a little bit random. I still am aiming for at least one more week until open beta actually goes for this update. This update is actually the Dreams Come True update. I'm hoping that if I change my schedule, okay, so previously it was every 2 weeks I would try to do something. But it seems like major updates like this, where it takes a month to actually make, has a bigger impact in terms of wowing people, but also what the whole algorithm of updates end up having a better chance of being featured. So it seems like I might have to just stick with only big updates versus just the small updates. For a while, I was doing that where it was like every 2 weeks I would be like adding this feature, and it would go straight to live. There was no testing. So yeah.
I mean, if that's the way it has to be done, then it's the way it has to be done.
Yeah, and I think the reason why I didn't do it before was the whole burnout situation of me trying to switch to the other game, and the community knows this, where I want to work on a multiplayer game, but at the same time, there's a lot of pros and cons to it. And when I decided to do it, there's going to be a lot of learning process. It's not going to be as quick. So the community knows that by me going back to One Bit Adventure, I'm going to amplify my speed and workload because I lived through it. I've done it for so many years that they know I can keep up with it. While if I work on Dungeon Greed, it's going to be a lot longer and more quieter. So, but yeah, in terms of the updates and stuff, now that I have my new work schedule in terms of how and when I work on the game, it actually puts it in a better perspective that I could do the 1 month major update thing.
Okay. And I suppose we should talk a bit about Dungeon of Greed since it's come up more than once.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned it's supposed to be the sequel to One Bit Adventure. What does that entail exactly?
So it entails into two things. The request for having a multiplayer turn-based game, but it's not turn-based, it's real-time. So it's a mixed bag of innovation. And so that was one reason where I wanted to not make One Bit Adventure a multiplayer, but work on a sequel that would entail its story elements as to how the world was created and what came about the Wraith. Because the Wraith is currently the only main story element in One Bit, but it's very vague. And so Dungeon of Greed would get into sort of the origins and how it went about. I call it a sequel. It sounds like a prequel, so it's it's still questionable. But it is going to be a different color palette. It's much more vibrant. And throughout my conventions, surprisingly, everyone still goes for Dungeon of Greed stickers, even though there's One Bit. It's one of those things where like I have faith in it and trying to see how it goes. But putting it on pause just so I could try to give One Bit Adventure the push is definitely going to be worth it. So.
And what state of development would you say Dungeon Greed is currently?
Yeah, that's very pre-development, I would say. I mean, even though I did work on making like a playable segment, it's still very much pre-development. There's a lot of core structures that need to be made. The multiplayer aspect I did test and had it working, but it was more of a throw it together, see how it looks, and if it looks great, then we'll move forward. But yeah, very pre-development.
I mean, it makes sense given what you've told us here.
Mm-hmm. And that's the one thing with Dungeon of Greed. It's actually in its third iteration where I had a procedural dungeon, but I didn't like the dungeon layout, so I scrapped it. And I tried it again, and then something wasn't right, and then I tried again. I might even go into the fourth one because so there is a decision to be made on how characters are made. So, in terms of how characters are made, the first iteration was modular, meaning you can have a different headpiece, you can have a different body piece, you can have a different weapon, and based off whatever you pick up, that would actually show. Like if you pick up a shield and you equip it, it'll show. In 1-bit, it doesn't show at all. It's just a single sprite, and that's one of the key differences that is very hard to like do. Like in terms of 3D, it's very easy. Like you want a 3D character to hold a staff and you switch a staff, it's easy, right? It's just a pull and it sticks on your hand. You attach it and you rig it. It's already good.
Just put a different skin on it whenever you can't get a new one.
Yeah, but that's when it comes to 2D, it becomes the whole, oh wait, this character type can't hold a staff. I had to create a character type for that. But what if the character needs blonde hair? So we put blonde hair, right? Just color swap. But then this body type is different. Well, then you're layering like 5 different things, and it makes it so that some of it feels right, but then others are 1 pixel off. So you have to adjust the pixel so it looks right. So yeah, that's my first iteration. And then it's just one of those things where it's just debating. It's like, is it really worth it, having modular? But I'm trying to like find different 2D games that have done it, but most of them don't have any move animation. They're idle animation. Stone. Oh man, now I'm trying to remember. Is Stone Shard the game? I want to say it's Stone Shard or something else. But it's a turn-based game. They have modular 2D sprites, but the characters do not move. And this is like smart of them to do that. They do a wobble effect when they move. It's just I want the animations. So, you want a move animation that works modular, then you got extra work that you got to do. So, yeah, that's my only debate, and it's still gonna be my debate until I actually push and decide one or the other. So.
Well, I suppose there's time enough for that debate.
Yeah. We'll let chat decide if it should be modular, which is essentially you could swap head type, body type, actually see what equipment you're wearing. If you're wearing like wielding a sword, wielding a shield, wielding a staff, or would it be like 1-bit adventure, except there's animations where regardless of whether or not you have a staff, you still have a sword. It's so weird, right? Like if I was a warrior and my attack animation was a sword, even though I'm wearing a staff, it just doesn't feel right. At least in 1-bit adventure, there's no need for that. You're not going to want to use a staff as a warrior. You just have no mana, so therefore you have no magic damage, and so it's like, yeah, you get no benefit. But in Dungeon of Greed, it might end up being that way.
And let me see here. So, someone here is wondering if you're planning to add quests to both Dungeons of Greed and more to 1-bit adventure.
Yeah, that it definitely. If they're speaking about like adventure quests, in 1-bit adventure, it's I want to say maybe. Oh man, now I'm trying to remember if it's like 50 quests. But I do want to add more in terms of stuff that's already made into the game and has a system. So more quests, more NPCs, basically adding on to it. It's definitely something I want to do. In terms of adding quests to Dungeons of Greed, I mean, it's still so early that it is going to have quest lines, different NPCs, but it is going to be a start to finish game.
Probably one of those things added with the lore type thing.
Yeah, and that's at least for that, it's more structured in a way that I can divide the levels and basically have more control over it. So, yeah,
makes sense.
Let me see here. So, what's the division of labor, so to speak, between the mobile versions and the Steam version of One Bit Adventure?
Yeah. Are you talking about like late? You said labor?
Um, do you develop both versions simultaneous, or do you work on one versus the other?
Okay, yeah. So I've actually managed to get away with working on one version and having that version work well with Steam. So essentially, there's one line of I should say one script that handles whether or not the game switches from portrait to landscape. On mobile, you cannot switch to landscape because the texts are way too small. You can't read it. Everyone keep requesting it, saying, I have a tablet and I want to play it on landscape." And I'm like, I've looked at every single tablet. No tablet can reach as good of a shape to have it that way. But yeah, essentially I do have specific code that only runs on the Steam version. And I want to say for the most part, I do focus on mobile. And Steam is the one that I'm still trying to get the key bindings to work properly and to like try to get it so that you can rebind keys. Because right now there's no way to rebind it. There's certain hotkeys. Of course, WASD is to move, spacebar is to wait, but there's no way to modify it. So when it comes to like that, definitely it'll be on the mobile version. It's all one version, except it's locked out. So only Steam can actually do certain things. So I think the main one is video. Video settings, like Steam has a lot of things that you have to deal with.
Oh, yeah.
Video setting being one, Mobile, I don't have to worry about video settings, so I have specific code to basically hide what needs to be hidden. So.
Interesting. Like, well, I think I've run through my gamut of questions. I'll see if my cohorts here have anything further for you.
Yeah.
I think I'm good. I've just been having, an interesting time just kind of whittling through it and also keeping an eye on chat, making sure they don't burn everything down. And I guess for anyone who...
good, but
I was going to mention it for anyone who... Sorry.
Sorry, I'm also good, but I've added the game to my Steam library, so I'm going to try it a bit later.
Awesome.
For anyone in the chat who's rolled up late, a VOD of this will be cut later so you can watch the interview in its entirety.
So that will be available.
People were just asking, will there be more items to add more colors? I'm guessing they're talking for themes.
Yeah, themes. Will be more items that add more color. I think they're wait, that sounds a little bit tricky. So when they say, will there be more items that add more color? Per se, I think they're talking about like Easter eggs. So for the month of April, there's these eggs that if you pick it up and you use it, it changes the color of your sprite. So your actual character could be like pink or blue or whatever.
Oh, those. That's cool.
Yes. So I think that's what they're referring to. It is possible it could have like weapon dyes or something like that. I wouldn't be opposed to it. It's just one of those things. It's like a little too niche. Like only a handful of people are going to want to do that. So yeah, it's very 50-50 on whether or not that would be a good thing or not to add.
Right.
Yeah, and in terms of like the future of Galactic Slice, I mean, it right now the core focus is One Bit Adventure. I'm really hyping up a lot of conventions, a lot of spreading the word, and in terms of trying to reach out to everyone, I'm looking for all the bad stuff. One of the hardest things to do as a game developer is to look at your bugs, look at your features that you don't want to add because it's hard, but it'll be a better benefit. That's the stuff I'm looking for in terms of right here, right now. I think the game convention was the recent one was Midwest Gaming Classic. I don't know if you're like part of the Midwest in Wisconsin. They had a gaming convention, and one of those things is looking at the actual person playing your game face to face, and then they run into something that you didn't think would happen.
The live tech failure, and you're like,
Yes.
damn it.
And so those are the best moments because there are some things that I'm like, oh wait, that actually happened. Like, oh wait, why are they struggling with this part of the game?
And the best part, it's on your own hardware, so you can just kind of hit the button to capture what the hell went wrong.
Yes.
And
So
it makes tech so much easier instead of somebody trying to describe it to you in a bug report.
Yep. And so, yeah, one of the things is just getting that feedback and trying to like kick it into gear for one bit is what I'm hoping to do and get that done for the near future, and next year is just going to try to get as much done as possible with that. So,
Well, that's good to know.
Mhm.
Anyway, so we are running out of time here, so unfortunately we have to conclude things. Jonathan, it was lovely having you on the program, and you being with us here today to talk about your game.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate it. Definitely looking more into like different podcasts to try to showcase one bit and provide a good time.
Good to know. Right, so if you enjoyed today's interview, as always, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you will know when we go live next time. And on that note, we will be back on Sunday for our traditional review session. And until then, I shall wish you good gaming.
Awesome. Thank you so much.